For 400 years they have existed, timeless in a changing world. Once the playthings of shogun, the favorites of samurai. Their sealed lips have kept silent as Japan has changed more than any nation on earth. They cheered their kamikaze heroes and then became the sweethearts of American GIs. Geisha have endured in a world sheltered behind the walls of secrecy and discretion. But finally the veil hiding the geisha has lifted, and we enter their forbidden world. Japan is one of the most advanced countries on Earth. Technology is its obsession. The nation's pursuit of efficiency creates rapid change. Yet for centuries, the Japanese have sheltered an extraordinary tradition: geisha. The geisha are the delicate guardians of ancient customs, an honorable past living in the present. Their world is closed to the public. They live shrouded in secrecy and steeped in ritual. They move in a storybook land of perfumed gardens and ornate temples, but make their living in dark back streets and hidden tea houses. American writer Arthur Golden fell under the spell of this mysterious tradition. He spent 10 years researching his novel, Memoirs of a Geisha, which would become an international bestseller.
It fascinated me, what I learned. It is so closed to outsiders. They really don't like people coming in and poking around and learning their secrets.
Arthur Golden had to break the seal of silence surrounding the geisha world. He faced a near impossible task, something like entering a closed religious order.
Before I began this research, if you'd asked me what a geisha was, I'm sure I would have told you what every American would have, except that I knew at least that they're not strictly prostitutes, that it wasn't quite that simple. But I certainly didn't understand the role they played or why they played it. And I've come to see the way that geisha figure into Japanese society as being something quite unique.
Exotic and alluring, geisha live in a world where refinement and grace are everything. Yet love is scorned as illusion. A perfect surface is what matters. Locked away from everyday life, geisha are the preserve of a select elite, the ultimate expression of prestige and status. For most, it is rare even to catch a glimpse of a geisha. They have become revered and celebrated symbols of Japan. In Kyoto, the ancient capital, an annual event celebrates Japan's most honored traditions, including the geisha. The Cherry Blossom Festival is a rare and much anticipated chance for the public to gaze upon the most private tradition of all. The geisha are on display, wrapped in all their silk finery. Women who are emblems of both history and sensuality. But behind their painted faces and delicate smiles is a difficult and intricate way of life. The Geisha house is the temple of this ancient art. For centuries, the geisha have witnessed the love affairs, betrayals, and deceptions of Japan's most powerful men.
A geisha is a woman who's available for hire to keep a man company during the evening. Usually, in fact, it's a group of men company during the evening. And to the surprise of most Westerners, that rarely involves sex. It simply doesn't exist in other cultures because we socialize together. The Japanese don't. This is where geisha come in.
They guarantee their clients total privacy under a code of silence.
A man who goes to a geisha house during the evening goes there on the assumption that nothing that's said or done will be taken outside those walls. This is a particular compartment. It's watertight. And this is what allows the geisha districts to exist, really. And this is why there's a kind of code of silence. A geisha mustn't talk about what has happened.
The geisha business is the only business in Japan run exclusively by women for men. At the top is the geisha mother. She provides all her girls with board and lodging and the precious kimonos, a considerable outlay of cash. In return, apart from a modest wage, the geisha give her all the money they earn from their clients. At one time, a geisha mother virtually owned her girls. They lived constantly in her debt. The geisha mother would begin recouping her investment by selling a girl's virginity to the highest bidder. This discreet auction relied on her vast knowledge of the private lives and desires of her local clients.
It's true that the stereotypical image of the women who run these houses, these geisha houses, is of a sort of a Cruella de Vil-like character who cares only about one thing, and that's money. But I think the stereotype evolved because there's a considerable amount of truth in it. These districts, the striking thing about them is that they're the one area in Japan where women absolutely rule.
Today it is in the best interests of a geisha mother to treat her girls well. It costs her no less than $500,000 to train a geisha. And if the geisha simply quits, the geisha mother loses a fortune. Apprentice geisha go through 5 years of training. By the end, even their gestures are distinctive. Every aspect of their appearance has acquired a symbolic meaning and an erotic power. Yuiko is an apprentice geisha, halfway through her 5-year training. The most valuable person in her life is her older geisha sister, Mamika. All trainee geisha have an elder sister to teach them the centuries-old skills they need to succeed. Mamika, Yuika's older geisha sister, lives the life of a supermodel. She can afford the very best, including $1 million membership to a country club and private coaching lessons.
Thanks to this job, I get to meet many people, eat good food, wear nice kimono, and travel to places where ordinary people can't go. In a word, I get to do many enjoyable things in life.
Mamika sets a high standard. To follow her example, Yuiko has to dedicate her life to the art. The word geisha means artist. As well as being professional companions, a geisha must excel in dance, music, and literature. Every graceful movement is carefully choreographed. The dances often tell stories about geisha who must sacrifice love for their art. A geisha requires the same dedication that a prima ballerina needs in the West.
The training is never ending. My instructor is still training after 30 to 40 years. Compared with her, I'm just nobody. There's no such word as perfection.
Geisha do not marry. Cut off from family bonds, they live together, as if in a sisterhood. They form close friendships which bind them for life. Only one Westerner has ever been allowed to become part of this closed way of life. It is now more than 20 years since Liza Dalby, a U.S. citizen, lived in Japan as a geisha.
A blue-eyed girl playing the shamisen, singing songs. It was the first time in geisha history. She got better at walking, sitting on her knees and
Liza had immaculate qualifications to become a geisha. She spent her teenage years in Japan learning the language and the shamisen, the traditional geisha instrument. She then went on to make the first ever study of geisha for her doctorate before becoming a geisha herself.
I didn't really stand out, and then I would come and I'd sit next to someone, and often he would start talking, and then suddenly he'd kind of look at me, notice that my eyes were not deep brown, and say, "Wait a minute, you're not Japanese, what's going on here?" And all the geisha would wait for that moment. I mean, sometimes they did this on purpose. They wouldn't tell the customers that the foreign geisha was here, and then someone would notice, and they would just break up. They thought that was so funny. Of course, walking is something you have to give up the way that you walk when you're wearing Western clothes, because the kimono, encases your legs rather tightly, so you have to take smaller steps. And I would always forget to do this, especially if I was in a rush, and then my feet would start flapping, and one of the older geisha would scold me, not to walk that way. But it's like learning a whole new body language. When a woman enters the geisha community, when she decides that she's going to make this her life, she makes a very conscious choice that she's not going to marry, that she's not going to be a housewife. It's sort of the roads really diverge there. Geisha don't marry. They don't follow the middle class way. They deal in the world of presenting themselves as works of art.
They are works of art, but they are also rented by the hour to entertain men.
Even though a prostitute's livelihood is sex, and a geisha's livelihood isn't exactly sex, the fact is that a prostitute can't really determine who she's going to spend the next hour with. And neither can a geisha.
Artists by day, companions by night, the image of the geisha has always been clouded by prostitution. From lowly beginnings, geisha slowly rose in stature until in time they would reach the forefront of Japanese society. Once sweethearts of samurai, in the Second World War they waved goodbye to their kamikaze heroes. How has the fragile world of the geisha retained its status through 400 years of turbulent history? And what became of those geisha who believed they could escape their traditions and find true love in the West? To understand the geisha, you have to know their past. Their story begins 4 centuries ago in the days of the shogun. Geisha first appeared in the early 1600s. After centuries of infighting among rival warrior lords, Japan became a united country under a military dictator or shogun. The government was set up in Edo, site of present-day Tokyo. Under shogun rule, Japan isolated itself entirely from the rest of the world for hundreds of years. The shogun's power was absolute.
One of the things that this government, which was very oppressive, did was to stamp out, for example, Christianity, and another was to take all of the prostitution and that kind of stuff and put it into restricted, licensed quarters to control it.
The pleasure quarters became places of sexual freedom. Exclusive prostitutes or courtesans would entertain samurai warriors and merchants at lavish banquets. It was here that the first geisha appeared. Surprisingly, they were men. They assumed the role of court jester.
These were entertainers who came into the parties that the courtesans had when they were entertaining customers at banquets, playing music, dancing, telling jokes, this kind of thing. And these were originally men.
One prostitute's list of clients was dwindling. In desperation, she set herself up as the first female geisha. Soon, female geisha outnumbered the men and then began to take the prostitutes' customers.
I think there must have been a great deal of rivalry between geisha and prostitutes in those early years in the pleasure quarters. The prostitutes, of course, had the upper hand and did everything they could to control the activities of geisha. But the truth is that sex, which was the prostitute's domain, is where the real money was for a geisha.
In 1779, a geisha's business was recognized as a profession, and a registry office called a kenban was set up to control it. The kenban prevented the geisha from entering prostitution.
And from the very beginning of the profession of geisha, they were not supposed to be in competition with the courtesans and the prostitutes. And you would see, again, the government controlled this very strictly, and you would see continuing edicts from the government that geisha were not supposed to be prostitutes.
The kenban's rules kept the geisha under strict escort to and from their banquets to prevent them from straying into prostitution. Regulations made the appearance of the geisha much plainer. For a while, only dowdy women were chosen as new geisha recruits.
The traditional image of a geisha in the West has often been confused with what is in fact a prostitute from the 1800s. The look of a prostitute and the look of a geisha are in fact fairly distinct. The geisha wears her obi, as the sash across the middle is called, tied in the back. Young geisha wear very long ones, older geisha wear shorter ones, but they're always tied in the back. A prostitute, on the other hand, wears her obi tied in the front, and the reason for this is that she's taking her kimono on and off all night. She can't have a dresser come and tie her obi up every time, so she does it herself, and this became iconic, the image of the prostitute with her obi tied in the front. Also, that image of lots of hair ornaments, so these little kind of combs, that's a prostitute. Geisha wear much more simple hairstyles.
Under these regulations, geisha prospered. The simplicity of the geisha's appearance became highly popular. Geisha districts spread across the country as Japan continued to shut out the rest of the world. Anyone caught fleeing from the country was beheaded. Outsiders were either regarded as something less than human or as corrupt. Into this closed world came the first American consul, Townsend Harris. He landed at Shimoda Bay in August 1856. His mission was to negotiate and sign the first trade treaty with Japan.
He found a country that was like it was 250 years earlier. It was apart from the rest of the world. It wasn't joined into the world. In culture, in trade, in manufacturing, nothing. They wanted to have nothing to do with any of the other nations of the world. Townsend Harris wanted to change that, and he met all sorts of resistance. They didn't want him there. I myself would have turned around and gone back to the United States. I wouldn't try it. But he did. He was a very persistent man.
During his negotiations, Harris asked the mayor to send him a geisha. When just a touch of a foreigner was thought aberrant, this was an outrageous demand. But Townsend Harris was insistent. A young geisha called Okichi was chosen.
Okichi was a geisha. She was very good looking and she was very talented. The mayor of the town thought that Townsend Harris liked her, and so the mayor decided that this was the one to send. And he tried to persuade her, but it was very difficult. In the end, he ordered her to go over there, and she went.
Her reluctance was short-lived. Okichi fell in love with Townsend Harris, and so became the first geisha to fall in love with a Westerner. A century later, their romance inspired a Hollywood movie starring John Wayne as an unlikely Townsend Harris.
Just as this white barbarian from the West, as they called him, was the first man to raise the American flag on Japanese soil, strange affairs behind closed doors of the geisha house. The shogun's palace, lavish beyond words.
The Japanese authorities had hoped Okichi might become an informant for them.
She was supposed to be a spy. How much information she sent back to the governor, or took back to the government, I don't know. My guess is she took very little. She became very quickly attached to Townsend Harris.
After 5 years of negotiation, Townsend Harris successfully secured the trade treaty. He then prepared to return home.
I'm not leaving because I want to, Okichi.
America. So far away.
Not so far away that I'll forget you.
Unlike the movie, reality was not romantic. It appears that Townsend Harris forgot all about Okichi, making no reference to her in his journal. Abandoned, Okichi was left to face the taunts of the townspeople who branded her a dirty foreigner. The first geisha to have a love affair with a Westerner collapsed into alcoholism and finally drowned herself. But the geisha of Shimoda, unlike Townsend Harris, have not forgotten her. Each year, Imi returns to the place where she died.
Okichi is very important for us geisha. Shimoda's geisha culture would not be in existence without the famous Okichi. We burn incense and pay respect to her every year.
After 250 years of oppressive shogun rule, a group of samurai warriors planned the government. They used the geisha tea houses as their secret meeting places.
The disaffected samurai who wanted to bring an end to this rule of the shogun needed places where they could count on people's discretion, to plot out what they were going to do.
With the support of the geisha, the samurai defeated the ruling shogun. When Emperor Meiji took over the throne in 1868, the geisha were now allied to the most powerful group in the country. And as the geisha's prestige and popularity soared, Japan leapt into the modern world. Western technology brought Asia into the age of steam. Young men cut off their ponytails and wore bowler hats.
Geisha were the most fashionable women. They were like movie stars today. These were the pin-up girls and the ones that everyone aspired to as the most beautiful women, the most talented women, the most fashionable women. These were all geisha.
By the 1900s, geisha numbers swelled to 25,000. Within a few years, a confident Japan had defeated Russia over the control of Korea. During the delicate negotiations that followed, a banquet was thrown for the Russian general Kuropatkin. A famous geisha called Okoi was brought in to entertain him. during her dance, the Russian general demanded that she hand him her obi sash. Okoi flatly refused. Her defiance impressed Prime Minister Tarakatsura so much he made her his mistress. Geisha now began to have intimate access to the highest powers in the land. For the first time in history, great men took geisha as their wives. The Japanese foreign minister, Baron Mutsu, married twice, both times to geisha.
Well, they made better wives than the daughters of regular households because they were trained rigorously to serve the males in a gracious way and graceful, and to keep secrets. Whatever was said in the presence of a geisha would not be repeated, especially repeated in any embarrassing way. So this was an important factor, sealed lips of the geisha.
Geisha were now the epitome of style and had unrivaled status. But the 1920s would usher in a new modern era, and with it, a powerful threat to their survival. The jazz age had arrived in Japan. Showgirls strutted on stage, and nightclubs opened their doors to a country eager for the latest Western fashion. The modern girl about town now wore the dress of the 20s flapper. Cafe girls became all the rage. They provided informal company for men which was cheaper than geisha, and daringly modern. For the first time in their history, the geisha faced a serious threat.
It's like a real turning point for them. They themselves made a conscious decision that they were not bar hostesses. In order to preserve what made them geisha, they were going to sort of hang on to the traditional dance, traditional music, traditional forms of entertainment. Geisha have become curators of tradition rather than fashion innovators, which was their social role before.
Luckily for the geisha, the jazz age would be short-lived. In 1926, Emperor Hirohito took the throne, and under his reign, Japan became a leading military power. Nationalism soon swept the nation. Western influences were denounced as corrupt. The geisha represented the very best of Japan's traditional culture. They were now worshipped as the very symbol of the nation, and their numbers swelled to an all-time high of 80,000 in the early 1930s. The old capital city of Kyoto, steeped in the past, enjoyed a surge of popularity. At its center was Gion, the geisha district.
Gion is something of a trademark among geisha districts that has the character of Mercedes or something. It is viewed as the district. Kyoto is the ancient capital and the seat of culture in many ways in Japan, where Tokyo is seen, say, as an upstart.
In the 1930s, the geisha from Gion were perfection personified.
Remember this as a time of great extravagance, getting a new kimono every month, or a man who was an industrialist calling 10 or 12 geisha in an afternoon just to go out and view cherry blossoms. There was just a lot of money, and people were very generous in supporting the geisha and supporting their arts and supporting their dancing. So it's just, times were very good.
But there was a dark side to this geisha heyday. In Kyoto, the demand for geisha became so high that families from the countryside would sell off girls as young as 7 or 8 to the geisha houses. Bought like prime pieces of meat, they were lucky if they ended up in the high-class geisha district of Gion. Here they became the legal property of their geisha mothers, who gained a reputation for being formidable and unscrupulous women.
It's a harsh, painful truth, but they were most successful when they viewed the girls in the geisha house as chattel, and they used them as economic tools. That really is how they became successful women.
Unlike the geisha of today, the girls of the 1930s seldom went into the job by choice. Shackled by their debt to the geisha mother for their training, their kimonos, and board and lodging, these delicate flowers were virtual prisoners. If a geisha tried to escape, townspeople would capture her and send her back. The custom, called mizuagi, of selling a girl's virginity to the highest bidder began in the 30s. Most geisha would be totally unprepared for this traumatic ordeal.
You know, we have this idea that geisha are trained in sex. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. The tradition is that the woman who's trained them will take them aside the night before and say, "Lie still." And that's about as much as they get in the way of training.
The event was very ritualistic. The man and the young girl would exchange sake cups, and then a banquet was thrown in their honor.
The geisha will go to the room which she'll share with the man and will prepare for his arrival by changing into, say, a different robe. I asked, what about the makeup? Well, no, you leave the makeup on. And I said, well, what if he wants to kiss you? She said, kiss you? Are you kidding? So evidently that isn't part of the ritual.
In Gion in the 1930s, one geisha's virginity was sold for a record sum of $850,000. But the only freedom from the geisha house came if a geisha was to find a rich dana or patron amongst her clients. The dana would pay for a geisha's expensive lifestyle, and in return she would become his long-term mistress. The downside was that geishas could find themselves locked into lifelong unions with men they did not love.
In the old days, the mother would choose, and if the girl didn't like the man, there was really not much she had to say about it. She just had to go along. It was a very exclusive relationship, and you entertained other customers, but your patron was the only man that you had, a sexual relationship with.
The Gion district of Kyoto has produced the finest geisha. Apprentices from Gion are called maikos. Their distinctive appearance has remained unchanged to the present day. Yuiko is 19 years old and has completed 3 years of her apprenticeship. When she first decided to become a maiko, her father was horrified.
Everyone still has the old image of Gion being a tough place. Some still think of a girl being sold if she becomes a maiko, although it's nothing like that now. Apparently, Dad's colleague at work told him off for allowing me to go to such a horrible place.
The $500,000 that it will cost to train Yuiko and clothe her in beautiful kimonos are the price of admission to a life suspended halfway between the present and the past. Yuiko lives in a traditional geisha house where her name is written on a wooden block above the door.
I was expecting this world to be a remote and closed place because people used to tell me you couldn't get out of Kyoto once you were in. I thought I was throwing myself into a land of evil. But on the contrary, my geisha house is a very friendly place and they take good care of me. I was expecting to meet some mean people, but everyone here is very kind to me.
Yuiko represents an enormous investment to her geisha mother. Every day, Yuiko has lessons in dancing, playing the shamisen, and also in tea ceremony. Inside the geisha house, Yuiko starts her makeup. In the past, the white paste contained lead and could turn a geisha's skin yellow from poisoning. Her mouth is half painted in crimson to suggest a seductive pout. A tiny margin of bare skin is left all around the hairline to enhance her mask-like appearance and heighten the sensuality of the bare flesh.
I think a glimpse of neck, especially the back of the neck where it's just covered up by a kimono, was very much like a glimpse of leg in the West. Geisha have managed to work this to their advantage by creating a kind of look that suggests an overlaid mask, and this margin of skin that shows at the edges suggests something along the lines, of nudity, really.
A geisha's most valuable possessions have always been her kimonos. A top geisha should have at least 24. Made from the finest silk, they cost several $1,000s each. An independent geisha needs a lot of money to build up her collection.
It was quite remarkable to me how important kimono really are, and it makes a great deal of sense if you think about the role that they play. Geisha must wear kimono to their engagements. Kimono are terribly expensive, especially considering that geisha are considered knowledgeable about kimono. They're associated with kimono. They're expected to be seen in very elegant kimono. A geisha not wearing an elegant kimono is, perhaps by definition, not a very elegant geisha.
A geisha's choice of kimono is dictated by the calendar. The black kimono symbolizes the start of the new year and is worn for very important occasions. The pink, with its blossom embroidery, worn in the summer. The orange one, with its Japanese maple design, is for the fall. The green one is for winter.
I wear this when the maples turn red. It's the most expensive one I have. Amongst all the kimonos that I have chosen, this is the most successful and the most popular one.
The geisha's worst fear has always been fire. The loss of her kimono collection would bankrupt her. Each morning, the kimono dressers get ready all the apprentice geisha in Gion. A geisha wears no underwear to avoid spoiling the line of her kimono. She puts on the obi, a decorative silk belt which acts as a back support. An apprentice geisha wears a brightly colored kimono with swinging sleeves and an obi worn high on the bust to give her a childlike appearance. The kimono is very heavy and hard to walk in. Apprentice geisha practice taking small, delicate steps with the toes pointed inward.
If you have that obi, that sort of wide support around your back, it's actually more comfortable sitting on the floor because it gives you little back supports.
Each week, Yuiko visits a special hair salon. The stylist has been dressing geisha's hair for 50 years. Like the clothes she wears, the hairstyle of an apprentice geisha is precisely specified. Sections of the hair are oiled and pinned in place, and hair pieces are woven in to thicken the real hair. The constant pulling often causes premature bald patches. The style is known as the split peach, characterized by a red piece of silk.
And I think the idea is that it's sort of unconsciously erogenous because there's a cleft and this pinkish look. Well, I think it's pretty evident what that's an allusion to.
Yuiko has to sleep on a wooden block to keep her hair in place and leave it unwashed till the next weekly visit. Their ornaments and flower decorations become personal to them. They would never consider borrowing someone else's or even touching them.
It is hard at first wearing the outfit, but now I don't mind it. I've got used to it. True, not being able to wash my hair isn't always pleasant, but it's my job to walk around in those kimonos and show people. It can be hard but rewarding too.
Before leaving the geisha house, Yuiko puts on high wooden clogs so her kimono does not get dirty. She's now ready for her evening's business. Yuiko's clients await her arrival. In the evening to come, all of her skills and artistry are about to be displayed. In one evening, Yuiko may attend as many as 5 banquets, continuing into the early hours. Clients part with up to $500 an hour for the pleasure of her company. The banquet is where an ancient ritual of communication is played out between the geisha and the men. Entertainment of this quality is considered highly sophisticated.
It's a kind of status symbol to be known. If you are the sort of person who patronizes the traditional arts, that's a very classy thing to be in Japan. So partly you are building your own reputation by doing this.
Tonight, Professor Mariah and 3 of his colleagues have booked their favorite geisha. To be clever with words is a geisha's most useful asset. This talent is more valuable than a pretty face.
We do not just wine and dine here. The conversation is very interesting. They have a large stock of topics. They study a lot. And we can feel that they are making such an effort to please us. It is wonderful.
This evening, the apprentices are providing the entertainment before the experienced geisha arrive. They are always of endless fascination to the clients.
Most of the time, they ask us questions about us Maikos. What do you do with your hair? What do you have to do? That sort of thing. They are raring to know about us, and by the time we've finished answering all those questions, time is up.
Some clients enjoy provoking the younger geisha.
Our clients are mostly older men, so they seem to like any young girls. If somebody fancies me, I don't like insincere men and hate to be touched. I find it terribly embarrassing when somebody tells me I'm pretty.
Outrageous or frivolous remarks are always popular. One of the geisha's most important skills is the pampering of the male ego. Yuiko is still learning and finds it difficult to keep up the repartee.
I am only human, and there are times when I feel unwell or am not in the right frame of mind to work. At such times, I just can't help being sulky in front of my clients and always regret it afterwards.
Mamika, Yuika's geisha elder sister, helps Yuiko contend with the difficulties of her job. Mamika's experience is invaluable for the young girl. Mamika herself is becoming the most successful geisha in Gion. She has left the geisha house, and now, without a geisha mother, she is free to take her own bookings and choose her own clients.
When you are a Maiko, you are living in somebody's house and being looked after. It was like living in a dormitory. so I didn't think it was hard, but I didn't have privacy. And when you are a maiko, you have to go to all the banquets once you accept them. So it's quite different from what I'm doing nowadays.
When a trainee or maiko becomes a geisha, it is called turning the collar. Mamika wears a white collar instead of the maiko's red one. A geisha's look is more elegant. Mamika no longer wears the bright colors of a trainee, but more subtle tones. She wears minimal makeup instead of a white mask, and the split peach hairstyle is replaced by a bun.
I have more privacy now than when I was a maiko. When you are a maiko, you have to use your own hair to arrange your hairdo. So it's not suitable for Western-style clothes to go out during the day. But when you are a geisha, you can wear a wig to go to a banquet. So you have more freedom and it's much easier to make your own time.
But independence comes at a price. Shop in Gion, the tiny belts that secure the obi cost $220 each, and the geisha's handbags to match her kimonos cost $500 apiece. An elite geisha like Mamika must be seen to live her life in the most luxurious way.
Geisha get accustomed to a particular lifestyle where they don't scrimp and save, and in fact you can't really do that. Part of being a geisha is that you do expensive things and you wear expensive clothing, and the idea of a stingy geisha is almost a contradiction in terms.
When an experienced geisha enters the banquet, she is greeted with great respect. For this evening, Mamika has chosen her yellow kimono. Yuika will be watching her as part of her training. Every apprentice must be adopted and helped by an elder sister.
The maiko, the apprentices at the banquets, don't really say very much because they're supposed to be watching and sort of, picking it up, sort of learning as they go along. But the more you do this, the better you get. So it's in fact the older geisha who are best at this kind of thing and are the most entertaining company.
In the 1930s, when competition was fierce, this became the only way for a maiko to learn the techniques and meet the best clients. Yuiko will benefit by spending hours at banquets with Mamika and learning by her example.
I am hopeless on my own, but in a few years I will become an older sister myself and have to teach my younger sisters. Being younger and inexperienced is hard, but to have to educate younger ones must not be easy either.
Although attitudes are changing in Japan, a husband rarely socializes with his wife. Her role is to run the home and raise a family, while her husband pays a geisha for his entertainment.
I'm proud of the fact that my husband plays with geisha. When he gets stressed out at work or meets somebody he doesn't like, he can go and have a nice chat with geisha. He comes home with a great big smile on his face after visiting geisha, so that makes me happy as well. It's not appropriate to compare geisha with ordinary housewives in the first place. Housewives may be professional in terms of housekeeping, but if we are tired, we might become sulky. We tend to have our ups and downs, but when it comes to geishas, the customers are always right and always smile at you.
You can't say absolutely not, they're not prostitutes. They may have affairs with men. I mean, these affairs are affairs for pay, which makes them very much like kept mistresses in the West. But they don't make their living from sleeping with men at the end of the evening.
If our husbands have affairs with ordinary women, we do not like it. But to have an affair with a geisha, a professional woman who is completely different from a prostitute, would be an honor. We would not boast of it. Maybe, but we wouldn't feel bad to have a husband who had an affair with a geisha.
In the past, geisha mothers would beat an apprentice caught spending time with a boyfriend rather than earning money with a client.
We are not openly encouraged to have boyfriends, but I'm sure some of the Maikos have boyfriends in secret. You can't stop young women from falling in love. We have less opportunities to meet men than other young girls.
Nowadays, the life in Gion is relaxed. Apprentice geisha are no longer forced to sell their virginity or to take men as long-term lovers. But the patron or dono system still exists. Mamika, Yuiko's elder geisha sister, has a wealthy dana to support her. In addition to earning $8,000 a month, Mamika also receives generous handouts from him, including an $850,000 apartment. In true geisha tradition, she keeps his identity a secret.
The kind of man I like is someone who is a good provider. By that, I don't mean money or material things, but someone who can share the pleasures of life, and also because of my unique occupation as a geisha, he has to be able to understand my life. We have to be happy within ourselves and self-reliant and see each other when we have time. That's my ideal type of man.
Although geisha cannot marry, they can have children by their patrons. If the children are girls, they help carry on the family business. There is really no place for boys.
It's entirely a world of women, and boy children tend to be spoiled. They very often end up in, as not very successful, because they're just sort of not prepared for life in the outside world, but there's really no place for them within the geisha world either.
Mamika and Yuiko visit their local shrine to pray for prosperity. The geisha business is precarious. Even in the late 1930s, when geisha were at their height, sacrifice and tragedy were just around the corner. Japan had gone to war with America in 1941, and the country called upon the patriotism of the geisha. They gave support to their war heroes and provided publicity for the news crews.
Kamikaze pilots are men trained for death. Nearly all the suicide pilots are between 16 and 20 years old. Celebrations are held to honor them when their training is finished. The prettiest geisha girls entertain them. This is their big day. To cries of banzai, they prepare for their last flight, which may destroy an Allied ship.
The Japanese had no doubt that they would win. The Emperor Hirohito was divine, and under his rule Japan could not fail. Pearl Harbor only confirmed this. While much of the population was forced to work in arms factories, the geisha's business carried on as usual. Many of their clients were important men in the military.
During the 40s, when the country was plunged into hardship, the geisha who had patrons among the military, of course, predictably, tended to do better than the ones who didn't.
But after 3 years of fighting, Japan's resources hit breaking point. The geisha houses closed. At 93, Yumi is one of the oldest working geishas in Japan. She remembers sacrificing her career for the war effort.
We cut the sleeves from the kimono and made overalls out of them. We had to make everything out of kimono, and this made our work clothes really stand out in the factory. People who saw us walking to the workplace used to say, "Look at those geisha go! They look splendid and so proud." And we said, "Of course we are proud, because we are doing this for our nation."
But there was one geisha who was not allowed to join the war effort. She had married an American, and for this she was forced to live in isolation. Her name was Yuki Morgan. As patriotism swept the nation, Yuki was branded a traitor. Her adopted daughter Nami recalls her persecution.
Everyone looked at us. There were so many hassles when we went out, so we avoided the crowd as much as we could. The police frequently came to her house, but she had done nothing wrong. But if we had to go to Kyoto on the train, there were always police trailing after us in the same carriage. She said, "I am an American, and I didn't leave America because I did something wrong. I lost my Japanese citizenship because I got married to an American, and I did nothing wrong. I shall live my life without any citizenship."
Yuki's extraordinary story begins at the turn of the century. She had been a very popular geisha and met an American who was traveling around Japan. He was from one of America's most influential families. His name was George Morgan, nephew of the famous Wall Street banker J. Pierpont Morgan, founder of the Morgan dynasty.
George just fell in love with her and pursued her, but she kept saying no, no, no. But George was persistent, and our family motto is "Vincit qui patitur," he conquers who persists. So he persisted and he conquered.
Yuki married George Morgan against the wishes of her family. Foreigners were still denounced as hairy barbarians, as they had been at the time of Townsend Harris. Yuki had to give up her Japanese citizenship, while George had to pay off her geisha debt. This would have been impossible for most, but luckily for Yuki, she was marrying a Morgan.
He did pay a considerable sum of money, I think about $20,000, to release her from the geisha. And so that might have pleased her family, I don't know.
Exiled from Japan, Yuki went with George to New York. But they found they were not wanted there either.
People just didn't marry Orientals or anything in those days, and it would have been very hard for anyone to understand how he could have done something like that and not married into the proper social circles that he'd been brought up in.
Disowned by Japan and now America, the couple started a new life in the south of France. After only 10 years of marriage, George died from a heart attack. Once again, a geisha and a Westerner had met with ill fortune. A grieving Yuki was left without any citizenship.
She couldn't get back to the States because she didn't have citizenship, American citizenship, unfortunately. I think there were papers that should have been signed and documented and whatnot when George was alive, and didn't get done. So that was, really unfortunate.
Her only option was to return to the land of her birth. But with Japan about to enter the war against America, she couldn't have chosen a worse time.
Of course, we got into the war, and then there was no way to be in contact with her at all. She wasn't getting mail or money or anything. It must have been a hard time because the Japanese weren't overly friendly to her. I mean, with the name like Morgan, and the bombs are dropping.
Yuki was forced to live through the war years shut away in her house in Kyoto. She died years later alone in her 80s. The rest of the geisha, who had worked so hard for the war effort, now had to face the terrible truth. In August 1945, the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered.
I didn't know in the morning, so I went to the factory for work, and then was told that I didn't have to work. Why? I asked. Then I was told that Japan had lost the war. We can't be defeated while we were all working so hard.
Yumi, like most other Japanese, had never entertained the idea that her nation could be beaten. The Japanese people watched in terror as the U.S. Army, under General Douglas MacArthur, took over the country.
The following day, the rumor had it that the Americans would be coming through Yokohama, so we must escape because we never knew what they would do to us. We were still at the registry office and didn't know where to go. Then the following day, the phone started ringing. It was the other geisha, who'd escaped the countryside, asking when we would start the business again. I said, "What are you talking about? We are here trying to find some place to escape to." Then they said, "We are so bored out here in the country, and we want to come back as soon as the business resumes."
Japan had been completely devastated. Its cities and its economy lay in ruins. Wealthy Japanese men were now bankrupt.
Dazed Japs, unable to believe their defeat, read bulletins from the Emperor calling for obedience to the Americans. The natives can find little news of consolation in their one-sheet newspaper either, and wander around bewildered.
So the geisha, who had been such models of patriotism, now switched allegiance. The geisha quarters reopened for business with the approval of General MacArthur. Fabian Bowers was his right-hand man.
The geisha had a strong sense of survival. They knew that their livelihood, their future, depended on their being even more charming than before. And so they did pick up a smattering of English very, very fast. But the geisha were always very elegant, as they are trained to be. And the Americans were rather crude. Sometimes they would object to taking off their shoes, for instance. But geisha are paid to be tolerant and to make the man think that he has done no wrong, can do no wrong, and will never do any wrong. And the Americans swallowed that hook, line, and sinker.
Yumi remembers relying on dancing and games to get past the language barrier.
We played a game called Kompira Funefune for them. Suppose there are 8 of them at the banquet. Then we put 5 futons or so in the center, and we all join hands and sing the little song of Kompira Funefune. When the song is finished, you must be on one of those futons. If you fail to do so, you have to be punished, which is normally to drink beer or something. The Americans were eager to have fun, so they would join in and dance, even if they were not sure what it was all about.
While the American officers amused themselves with the geisha, the troops looked elsewhere for their entertainment.
The women were terrified of American soldiers at first. But we only had to be there a week before all these 19-year-old soldiers had picked up their pom-pom girl. Girls that you could slam bam, thank you ma'am. And for a chocolate bar, you could have the prettiest girl in any area you wanted. The Americans had heard the word geisha and immediately pronounced it geisha and thought that the girls they slept with in the parks were geisha girls. Well, they were certainly not geisha. They were girls from every layer of society who were simply hungry.
Reed Carawan was a private in the 41st Division. He recalls how the Japanese authorities had prepared for the soldiers' arrival.
They set up some geisha houses to service the servicemen of the Army of Occupation. And these geisha houses were located in 3 different areas. Part of my duty was to patrol one of them to keep the peace. It was like a stockade, and they bought a ticket at the gate. The ticket cost them 20 yen, good for one time only. It said so on the ticket. And they would go in and pick out a young lady that suited their fancy, I suppose, and then they would retire to her cubicle, and then afterwards they would leave, hopefully. They told us that they were put there to keep us from raping the population, that they were there strictly to service the servicemen. And these girls who said they were geisha girls, they were prostitutes. And I think they used the term geisha more or less because it was easy for us to understand.
The geisha's good name was being ruined by the ranks of freelance prostitutes. By the early 1950s, there were 50,000 of them in Japan, catering to the foreign troops, many of them masquerading as geisha.
The American GIs actually came back with stories about geisha girls, and I think it must have been at that time more than any other that the idea of geisha, as they were called, being prostitutes entered the Western mind.
Ever since the U.S. occupation of Japan, the image of geisha has been tarnished by the shadow of prostitution. Many have tried to renounce the seedy image, but some geisha have used it to their advantage. The most notorious are called the Hot Springs Geisha, who operate across the country in holiday resorts. The best known live and work in the coastal town of Atami. Komami runs one of the many geisha houses and targets her business at tourists.
I started to play golf when it became fashionable. Many of my clients played it, so I thought that I should learn it so I could chat with them about it. If the sumo tournament is on, we might talk about sumo. But it's the same throughout the world that men also like to talk about sex.
At the bottom are the hot springs geisha, as they're called, and they're really prostitutes. They masquerade in a certain sense as geisha. They call themselves geisha. They wear kimono, which are associated with geisha, of course, and they come in and entertain during parties just as geisha do, except that their aim, and where their real money is, of course, is to offer themselves to these men at the end of the evening. Really, they're principally prostitutes who come in and play games that are pretty seedy, where people lose their clothing. Those sorts of things don't generally go on in the top geisha houses.
To be honest, all men like dirty jokes. And if they fancy you, they might come up and say, "How about tonight?" kind of thing. If they are my type, I might think about it. I don't know. I may answer like, "If you are okay with somebody like me, I'm okay with you." But normally they all look at me and run away.
Unlike more expensive geisha, who provide exclusive and private entertainment for executives, the Hot Springs Geisha are happy to entertain coachloads of up to several hundred tourists at a time. These Hot Springs Geisha aren't tied by pretensions of respectability. They just try to get away with as much as they can. There are no painstaking preparations here or priceless kimonos. It's on with the makeup and ready for business in 15 minutes. Forget long sessions at the hairdressers. They found the instant answer. Like a theme park, they put on a show twice a week for the tourists. For $8, the visitors get tea and an hour of dancing. Although these girls' resemblance to a real geisha is only skin deep, tourists are happy in the belief that they're seeing the real thing. After the dance, the tourists can pose with their favorite geisha. This drive to bring in custom may seem cheap to other geisha, but it clearly works. Every show is packed. Seen as the lowest in the geisha hierarchy, the numbers of hot springs geisha in Atami have swelled to over 400. They have a lot to celebrate. They've created a wonderland which is accessible and reasonably cheap. Men can enjoy the geisha experience without being connoisseurs. With such change threatening the fragile geisha world, Liza Dalby returns with apprehension after 20 years to see how her old geisha friends are prospering.
Liza です。
あら、ライダさん。
おかみさん、こんにちは。
まあ、いちきくさんも、どうも長いことですな。
お元気ですか？
おかげさんで、どうぞ上がってください。
ありがとうございます。
行って昔のお話しましょう。
When I first arrived in Kyoto, first thing I did was go to Pontocho because it's like going back home. I felt like I was one of her Maiko that had gotten married and left, but always comes to see her when I come back. And I'm always made to feel at home. And like, this is sort of a place where I belong, and this is a contact that will never fade away.
Geisha sisters are more than close friends. For the geisha, this is as close as they get to family. For Liza Dalby, her return to the past is painful.
After I left, I had been back in the States for about 6 or 8 months when the other geisha sent me a newspaper clipping telling me about the fire in Pontocho, in which my older sister had been trapped in the house, and she died in that fire, and it was a huge shock. She was only 24, and her whole career lay in front of her. So that was a very tragic end to one of my geisha friends. When I come back to Kyoto and see these people, I can easily imagine myself as having stayed and being part of this world. But that was in the mid-70s, and Japan was having very good economic times. Of course, when you're in those times, you think that they will continue forever.
Today, with the country in a recession, geisha families are dying out. The geisha houses are closing. In Tokyo, the numbers of true geisha have shrunk to barely 100, and their bookings have fallen by more than half. But Tokyo is also home to some of the most exclusive geisha houses in Japan. They cater to business executives and politicians. The most prestigious are the Shimbashi geisha. They train for hours every day under the strict teaching of the grand dance master. Kamika and Koyuko are highly experienced geisha. The future of the business relies on the dedication of women like these.
We would like this business to survive. To do that, we must practice more and provide better service to clients so that they will want to come back to us. We will do our best.
But despite all their efforts, the demand for geisha is falling. Their geisha mother handles the bookings.
Business is worse than ever, to put it simply. I wouldn't want to think that things could get any worse. The number of bookings for banquets have dramatically declined, 1/3 of what we used to receive. There is a big difference compared with what it was 10 years ago. When we started, we had to work until 2 or 3 a.m., and I remember being very sleepy every day. But now there are nights when we have no work. Physically, I've never been healthier. Business in general is bad in Japan. Also, there has been a lot of criticism about entertaining business clients by the media, and that's kept the business down.
Media coverage has been unflattering, and a rash of scandals has further blighted the geisha's image. The most shocking was the case of Prime Minister Suzuki Uno, who was toppled from office when his geisha mistress went public about their affair.
She went public and accused him of treating her badly. And all of my geisha friends said, that woman can't even be considered a geisha because, going public with something like that, is completely against the code of a proper geisha.
The geisha broke the centuries-old rule of silence, and the resulting scandal forced the Prime Minister to resign.
So the general impression of the public is that he was tricked by a cheap woman and that he didn't pay her enough. What a stingy man.
The incident suggested that the geisha business could be attracting the wrong sort of woman.
She was definitely not a geisha. That is forbidden as a geisha. Rule number 1, you must be able to keep secrets. You do not talk about politics or economics at banquets. Geisha don't need to know about those things. So she was not a geisha, rather a hostess.
Nowadays, people go to bar hostesses, and hostess bars, very much like the continuum of geisha from elegant down to pretty seedy, run the same gamut and can be terribly expensive. Geisha are kind of a cultural icon and continue to survive, but the principal function of providing female companionship during an evening is no longer something that geisha exclusively do.
Changing attitudes are changing male tastes.
The young people today don't want geisha. The older man may still miss the good old days of banquets and call geisha, but the younger ones are not interested in geisha. They prefer younger hostesses.
They don't know what geisha is in the first place. They don't understand what geisha do or what they are supposed to do with geisha. Geisha have less free time too. A hostess can, for instance, have another job during the day, then slip her evening dress on and start working. But we geisha have got to take lessons, spend 1 hour or so putting on our wigs and makeup and getting dressed in kimono. This means we spend an extra 3 hours per day getting ready, while hostesses can work part-time and earn some more money. It's quite hard when there is a recital coming up and the lessons are really exhausting. It's so exhausting during the day that you don't want to be bothered with your banquets at night. The grand dance master's lessons are booked by the hour, but the elder geisha lessons go on and on.
Today, with so many other opportunities for Japanese women, it's hard for the geisha houses to find dedicated recruits. Hana-chan was a trainee geisha in Tokyo. After 7 years, she'd had enough. She relaunched herself in Europe as the first punk geisha. After several years of living in Europe, Hana returns with her child to visit her old geisha friends. While their greetings are heartfelt, their memories of her are less happy.
Hana-chan was 19 when she came to this place. She was chosen out of the girls we interviewed. Back then, she was still a university student. Shortly after she started, we explained to her the role of a trainee as we really wanted her to stay, and she wanted to do it. After that, she learned dancing and made her debut as trainee. But for us all, it was just the beginning of all the trouble.
Despite the radical change in her life, Hana-chan still feels a strong affinity with her geisha family.
I met my geisha sister yesterday, and it was so nice. It was more like a wonderful feeling meeting my family again. My sisters and I are so close. It's like having a whole life together.
But to her old geisha friends, Hana-chan's behavior was outrageous. It's still an embarrassment to them. Much to their annoyance, she was far more popular with the clients than they ever were.
We used to call her a space cadet. We used to say she was born in NASA. Hana just said so many outrageous things, but maybe that appealed to the customers. She does not have any common sense, but clients who would come to places like this found it cute. They come to a place like this to relax, not to have a serious talk, so that's why she was popular. This town is going to finish very soon. The restaurants will be okay. They can have work without geishas. But many places, like Kyoto, may be changing because the customer doesn't understand the art of shamisen or dance. They can't enjoy this. They can't sing together because this is old style. They don't understand the old words. They have no interest in it. They'd rather have karaoke.
By adapting, Hana-chan has been the first geisha to profit from popular culture. But throughout Japanese history, most geisha have trusted in the strength of tradition. The geisha have endured the dictates of the shogun and prospered during the reign of the emperors. They survived changing fashions, Western influences, and even the devastations of a world war. In a country which is leaping into the 21st century, geisha are one of the last remaining links with the past.
In some ways, it has always seemed to me that the modern geisha exists on a kind of life support, really. Because, yes, there are men who love to go there, but they love to go there because it reminds them of something that once was. I think that it's such an old-fashioned way to spend an evening nowadays, when there are so many alternatives around.
Desperate to survive, even the exclusive Tokyo geisha have had to open bars to satisfy modern tastes. Customers can walk in off the street and share a drink with a geisha, a much cheaper option than a full banquet. Even in the most traditional strongholds, attitudes are changing. In Kyoto, the geisha capital, Canadian Peter Mack has become accepted as a regular customer. Rather than visit a tea house, he pays for his favorite geisha to accompany him out on the town.
At first it's a little bit of a novelty, you know. This foreign customer, it's Peter. It's fun, and I'm sure I take them to different places than some of the older customers would. I'm sure it's a little bit of a relief, you know. Peter's called us, so we're going to go to a fun place tonight. じゃあやろう。私はもう借りはって2人ともな蓋渡してなんでやねんね握っとんねん。Being a foreigner and being one of the youngest, and definitely one of the only foreign customers in Japan, I feel a little bit privileged to be in that situation. So, you know, it's just special, and I don't mind spending my money on something that is so rare. I just wish that the younger Japanese people would actually take more interest in it. Not so much the girls themselves, but the customers. I wish the younger customers would actually take more pride in preserving their culture by, you know, becoming customers in this world. Everywhere you go on the street, you see them dressed as North Americans, singing rap music, and I bet if you asked any of them what a geisha was, they wouldn't be able to give you an answer.
But even Peter takes his favorite geisha to karaoke bars. Perhaps outsiders will help to rejuvenate a tradition which the Japanese themselves seem to be discarding.
I just don't want them to sell themselves out to Western society just to save the profession. I'd rather die out completely than to become something so different from what it actually started out as being.
Mamika is both a modern woman and a traditional geisha. She maintains the lifestyle of a geisha from the 1930s. Her wealthy donna pays for a life of luxury, of Gucci clothes and champagne cocktails. For her younger geisha sister, Mamika is the perfect example to follow. The future of the geisha tradition will be carried into the next century by young and dedicated apprentices like Yuiko.
I wasn't really aware of what being a Maiko meant at first, but I have realized that people from all over Japan and all over the world come to Kyoto just to see us. When people show their excitement in seeing us, I become more determined to make them happy. I realize this job is wonderful and important as Japan's traditional culture.
Yuiko has made a rare visit to Tokyo to see her family.
I rarely wear Western clothes anymore. Once or twice a month I wear Western clothes, but I feel more comfortable in kimono. I'm the opposite of people in general and feel uncomfortable in Western clothes.
When Yuiko was only 15, she had already decided to become a geisha.
Yuiko was very determined and said she would go to Kyoto without sitting for her high school entrance exams. Her will was strong, and eventually my husband gave in and came to accept that that was what Yuiko wanted to do. Nobody knows about the future, but at this minute I would like to stay. Of course, if I find something else that interests me, I might go for that. But at the moment, I want to carry on training to become a geisha.
Yuiko shows the iron dedication that has typified geisha through the centuries, the strength of character that will ensure their survival as women and as geisha.
I hope, and I think it will continue as more than just a museum piece, because there are still women who are attracted to that way of life. I mean, it's the rare person, to be sure, but it's a kind of traditional glamour that that holds well, and it's attractive. It's an attractive life.
The Japanese are extremely good at preserving things unique to their cultural heritage. And there's no question at all that geisha are unique to their cultural heritage. They will continue to ensure, as much as it can possibly be done, that geisha do survive, because I think so many people in Japan would find it a pity if they didn't. On the other hand, you can't really artificially keep a society or subculture like that alive. The future of geisha is, I think, very uncertain.